Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augment Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I am your host as usual, and welcome back to the show. Obviously, there will not be a Friday episode this week because I'm busy with schoolwork. So I know you guys are going to get on my nerves about that one. But like I told you guys, we're doing bi-weekly now. Obviously, in terms of the show's growth, thank you guys so much for your continued support. We're already nearing 600 downloads right now. So you guys are going crazy with these downloads. So thank you guys so much for that. I really appreciate it. Obviously, today's episode is pretty straightforward because we have a special guest coming back again. And obviously, I don't know if we really should introduce him because he's already been around the block before. So I don't know if he wants to introduce himself. He can say whatever he wants, but
I'm good.
Yeah, it's pretty much that. So obviously, Juan's back on the show. It's a pleasure to have Juan back. Obviously, very knowledgeable human being as well. So obviously, I'm going to let Juan. I would say I want to let him introduce it because he's more familiar and he's been talking about it recently. So I want to let him go into the topic.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're going to be talking a little bit about performance benchmarking and how is it that we should be reporting on improvements from one generation of mobile gadget to another, and how this is a bit more difficult to quantify than just putting a single number into a spreadsheet that then spits out a bar graph which is bigger than your competition. So I mean, we can kind of take this back a bit, or we can jump in wherever you want to start the conversation.
So I think the probably the best place to start is let's start with the whole performance benchmarking thing, because I feel like that's what will set the foundation for this whole conversation. So obviously, I'm assuming most people that listen to the show, or if people that watch tech reviews to begin with, are very familiar that they always like going to Geekbench. They always like relying on these benchmark scores to quantify, oh, this phone is overall better than this phone in terms of the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, some people say, well, we shouldn't really focus on those numbers so much because real world experience is much different compared to numbers and statistics, which that is very true as well. But I feel like every time we say that, we don't really mean it. Like we say that real world experience matters, but then we always keep going back to the benchmarks always. And we always try to use that as, I'd say, the way to justify our opinions on something. And this is very evident, especially when we look at the current iPhones. Obviously, in terms of benchmarking scores, yes, they are rating higher than Android phones for a while now. Like, I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult part of the conversation, and I think you've touched on something really important. I know the last time I was on, we talked a lot about YouTube metrics and popularity, algorithms, and things like that, but the game has gotten so fast that for all of our complaining that we want to try and judge performance in a more meaningful fashion, it hasn't abbreviated, or I should say it hasn't increased the amount of time that a reviewer has to really spend with a gadget. So we're kind of stuck in the same holding pattern of, if my video and all the hard work that I put in my video is going to be meaningful and it's going to perform well and it's going to hit those ad metrics and YouTube is going to keep it in the popular trending topic category, I need to be out just as fast as every other outlet, or I've got to find some other hook later on that will require significantly more work to kind of maintain my position in YouTube search. So we can complain about how synthetic benchmarks don't necessarily represent sort of an accurate estimation of real world performance, but that really won't change in how these gadgets are reported on until sort of viewers are willing to entertain longer term conversations on these gadgets, that a video from a reviewer you trust, which comes out a month after launch, needs to be shared significantly more aggressively from the fans than what YouTube will promote, because it's not a true meritocracy. This is manipulated search to keep YouTube popularity higher. But when we focus on synthetic benchmarks specifically, I think another thing that a lot of consumers miss, we have abbreviated this discussion down into one single number score. And that seems to be the way that a lot of rankings are communicated. You can look at camera performance rankings from outlets like DxOMark. There's a lot going on in a DxO score. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, but we're only going to share that final number. That final number might not apply to your usage. And the same thing happens with Geekbench. When Geekbench performs its series of tests, it's not just one performance test. It's a whole collection of different ways that you can tax a CPU. And it's really up to the consumer to dig into those individual granular tests to see, oh, well, I actually do a lot of document work on my phone. These tests will probably be more appropriate for my style of usage than all of these gaming and graphics benchmarks. That doesn't matter to me as much. But the way that tech reviewers will sort of conclude which gadget is better than another, we're all at that holding pattern of, well, the Geekbench final number here is bigger than the Geekbench final number over here. So for all users, this is the better phone. That's not really what benchmarks are trying to accomplish. It's just the popularity of a benchmark usually gets boiled down to its lowest common denominator.
Yeah. And I think it kind of relies on the same thing, especially because now we've gotten to the point that, especially like if we want to apply a little bit of John Prosser's thinking, that smartphones have gotten to the point that they're just so good that most people don't really want to upgrade that much every year anymore, that every phone is very capable in their own right, even though some people say, oh, the benchmark isn't as high as the other one, but in terms of performance, it performs really well. Obviously, the main debate, if we go by current standards, like right now with the new iPhone 11 Pro, which we will talk about that because there are
absolutely
some things in there that stick out like a sore thumb, but we'll get into that later. But for purposes right now, we'll mainly talk about how, in terms of Android, obviously the main competition is between the Note 10 Plus and then the OnePlus 7 Pro right now, and you can even throw in the ROG Phone 2 as well, because it has the A55 Plus. So those three are the big heavy hitter competing.
Yeah, there's quite a bit going on in the Android space right now, because we've made it through the summer and now we're getting into the second half of the year. We've got all of the phones that are coming out with the 855 just before. We'll see a handful of phones coming out with the 855 Plus, which is just a refresh, a half-year refresh from Qualcomm on their Snapdragon. But just to cycle back real quick, and I think this is one of the reasons why confidence in tech enthusiasts is at an all-time low with the general consumer population. The people that rely on smartphones as commodities, but they aren't tech fans like we are. Like, we really get into this stuff. Is kind of exactly what you were describing, where we've got reviewers out there who will say things like, oh, well, these phones are crazy powerful and you probably don't need this as your daily driver, and you'd be fine with some sort of lower end smartphone. But then we spend so much time harping on the $800 plus tier of smartphones, and we're really not paying good service to the phones that are arriving in that $300 to $500 category, where you can get some stonking good buys. And those phones are still ridiculous overkill for most of the basic day-to-day smartphone computing. But if you listen to tech reviewers, it's always one of those really dismissive, like, well, I mean, if you need you need to get what you want, and if you want to use something low class or low rent, then that would be fine. I mean, if that's fine for you, then you can. But I'm going to use this $1,000 Samsung because that's what I need when I'm showing you how Instagram works, and I'm showing you the auto performance on the camera shooting 1080p video and how the selfies fire. But that's what I need, because I need a premium experience for my absolutely basic estimation of consumer use. So it is kind of attacking the tech enthusiasm scene in a way that we should be leading more of these discussions instead of just paying lip service to it. But again, if you go off and you want to spend more time talking about some of these other options in the marketplace, your channel will absolutely suffer for it on YouTube's popularity rankings.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we've kind of seen this a lot. Like, most of the videos, especially, heck, I could pull up YouTube right now on my phone, and I look in the tech section, and obviously the main things that probably pop up are either going to be Marquez's video going over the iPhone 11 Pro or anybody talking about the new iPhone.
Oh, totally.
And it's what's going to pop up because, like you said, the algorithm is trying to promote more of these what's hot and trending rather than informative and actually well-detailed discussions, which I remember you even brought up the same point last time, that we should be leading these discussions rather than just, paying lip service and, just being followers and not, being a bunch of sheep, essentially. And that's not a pun on Apple. That's just overall, that's kind of just what sheep do, is they follow the shepherd regardless. And
well, and this is, I think we're moving into that phase where it's not about a Samsung sheep and it's not about an iPhone sheep or an Apple sheep. Right now, I kind of think a lot of people have fallen into the trap of being YouTube sheep, right? Look at how many people in your YouTube feed are playing this game of trying to appease the YouTube algorithm. And then when you stray, when you go to another community, you go to a popular subreddit, you'll see this wealth, this variety of content, but it's not in your YouTube feed. It's buried in those YouTube metrics. Yeah. But, I'm going to the little subreddit that I host, and I'm seeing Tasker profiles and a Garmin watch and the Matrix Pad Z4, which is a low-cost Android tablet, and an editorial on Apple Arcade, and there are other videos out there than just here's another iPhone 11 video, Note 10 video, Note 10 video. What YouTube is trying to do is manipulate what will keep you on YouTube longer, just like Facebook, and that's not really representative of the broad variety of topics that other producers are trying to tackle, but they're not getting the support. They're not getting the visibility because of these automated systems from Google.
Yeah. And I think that's also true. Like, I know some people are going to say I'm going to take shots at him, but, they kind of make jokes about Painfully Honest Tech. Like, oh, this video is always going to be the first one that comes out, and then it follows by this one, it's followed by this, and it's followed by this. And they kind of make jokes about it. And there's nothing against, I'm going to have nothing against him, clearly, because I barely know him. But, they kind of point out this pattern, and a lot of people in that comment, there was like 120 comments, just people saying, you're right, like, this is going to happen. This is the pattern that happens because you want to stay relevant in the algorithm. You want to constantly, what's popular? What are those, I'd say, magic words that kind of get people, like, what drags attention?
Right.
And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but I will say that it's not a fair system overall, because then if you include those magic words, then for sure your stuff is going to be pushed in the algorithm in a special way that will make it so it's more available. So, like, depending on
I appreciate you being totally fair. I'll say that there is something wrong with it, because I know Jason. I don't want to speak for Jason, but I've seen him on a number of other podcasts recently where he's going through that bit of an existential crisis. He's relying on his income as a content creator. He's having to play ball with a certain flavor of this YouTube algorithm, which YouTube will change on him at some point. And it definitely does seem to be a stressful situation for him in trying to produce content in a specific way and building a part of his audience on a certain flavor of tech debate or tech controversy. I would worry, not specifically for Jason, but I would worry for anyone who is producing content at that level and with that audience, that's probably an unsustainable situation. But I don't want to get too deep into sort of the YouTube drama for specific content creators.
Yeah,
I think what happened, especially after this iPhone 11 announcement, and now that we're starting to see iPhone 11 reviews popping up on the big heavy hitter channels that always get early access, is this is another data point where I don't think we've solved this issue. I don't think we've solved this problem of how to clearly communicate what an improvement might be from one phone generation to the next. And when we're looking at ways that we can judge real world performance, I don't see where marketing claims are really being met. And so even for this isn't unique to Apple, but of course, I mean, I think Apple kind of deserves their share of the limelight here for making some of the grandest claims with some of the most passionate fan base.
Yeah.
And then when you actually try to hold them up to their claims, you run into friction with other people online because those claims usually aren't challenged. We kind of just take what Apple marketing says for granted, and when we try and assess that, it doesn't always hold true. And that I think that's still a valuable part of the discussion for consumers out there. Because again, I think consumers are exhausted by this stuff because they've been promised time and time again, revolution, amazing, magical, when really what they get is every 3 years, your phone gets a little bit better.
True.
That's really, I feel like that's actually the reality for most consumers out there. And they haven't been properly exposed to some of the newest services and tools, which could make that better for them. But when they're falling back and using the phone like they always have, a newer, more powerful phone really won't change their usage much. It's not really going to shake up or revolutionize what they do on a gadget unless they try to do something more aggressive on a gadget.
Yeah, and this perfectly goes back to the whole basis that we're really building this argument on is over the whole benchmarking scene, essentially. I'm not going to call it a scene, but I'd say more of just benchmarking in general when it comes to our gadgets, because this system is clearly flawed. Like, I don't think anybody can argue it's clearly flawed. Like, we're going by these metrics that are, especially when we go over the Apple event. Like, I remember I saw you tweeted about it and you made a joke about it. Like, a little blue bar does not define to me what is an improvement. It does not, like, okay, I see a blue bar that's bigger than this other bar. What is this gap? Like, there is a gap, but what does this gap represent? Like, what aspects is this gap specifically focusing on? Is it talking about, is it improvement in battery? Is it improvement in performance? Like, what is that performance increase? And this really leads into the whole point of your current, like what you were talking about when you did the videos of your findings, how your XS Max wasn't able to render video as fast, or really the SE was performing on par with the XS Max, which...
That's right.
And you can go into that a little bit if you want to as well.
Yeah, for sure. So to start with Apple, it's not necessarily a benchmarking scene issue as much as I feel as much as it is what are the claims being made by the manufacturer. Apple is making a claim, and they're using some very clever psychology to demonstrate the superiority of their products over the competition. And we see this with every Apple keynote, and we've seen this since the days of the Power Mac. I remember when the dual-core, dual-socket Power Mac came out. It was on the IBM PowerPC platform. Apple has this love affair in their keynotes with drawing a line on a screen and then not properly noting what that line represents. And I think for a lot of people, when we get back to the iPhone 11 and we see blue line is longer than gray line, that it seems to be a very limited, cherry-picked data point that represents single-core performance from one generation of A-series Apple processor to one generation of Snapdragon Qualcomm processor. That seems to be the general consensus. So that's kind of misrepresenting how modern smartphone computing works, because we also know that a lot of apps and services are trying to leverage multi-core performance between iOS and Android apps. So to say, like, oh, well, we dominate in this one flavor of one test, only measuring single core performance, doesn't truly represent the performance advantages of the A-series chipset and how that properly compares to a Snapdragon. At the same time, this Apple keynote, especially for the iPhone 11 Pro, heavily leveraged conversations about content creation.
Cool.
So what started out as kind of a snarky tweet, and then I was, immediately Apple fans demanded I showed my work or verified my numbers, even though I've been doing this for several years. And these are tests that I've been running since I was the senior editor at Pocket now. So, it started out as the snarky tweet saying, yeah, you can show me these lines all you want. My iPhone SE still can just barely outperform the iPhone XS in a video rendering test. Yeah. I'm combining two of Apple's claims. So that's on me. I'm combining their claim that the iPhone should dominate for content creation, and I'm combining that against their claim that Apple hardware is not only substantially more powerful than previous generations of Apple hardware, but can still significantly outperform the same generation of Android hardware. And one of the ways that I am trying to consistently represent that is by rendering 1 minute of UHD video. And to keep that comparison fair, I am using UHD video that's pulled from my mirrorless camera. It's a Panasonic G85 100 megabit per second UHD video, 30 frames per second. And I run that through various apps on each phone and each platform to see how quickly can they chew through that video. So using iOS products, using an iPhone SE, where I had the battery replaced, so it's back up to 98% battery health, so it's not throttled like an iPhone SE probably should be. And comparing that against the 2018 iPhone XS, not the XS Max, but the XS, and they're both running iOS 12.4. They're both using the same video file. They're both outputting to the same quality. The iPhone SE is still consistently between 1/2 and 3/4 of a second faster than the iPhone XS on Apple hardware, on the same Apple generation of the Apple operating system, and using first-party Apple software. This is Apple software, a video rendering, video editing software that came directly from Apple. So this is obviously one very specific test. This is one very specific representation of performance, and it doesn't match up. It doesn't compare against every other type of use that you might have on an iPhone. An iPhone XS is a little bit snappier at loading games. You're going to find other metrics, but I think that this is germane because Apple has made the biggest claims about mobile content creation, and they've made the biggest claims about the improvements to their hardware, to their processing power. So if a consumer were to see that and think, hey, you know what, I really want to start making more stuff from my phone, I think the natural inclination would be to see blue line bar graph bigger than gray line bar graph, and they've got a partnership with Filmic Pro, and if I make something on my phone, man, the iPhone is going to be so much more powerful than the iPhone I currently have, when that's probably not completely true. That's probably not going to be completely accurate.
Yeah, and I'll even throw like one of my personal experiences, because when the new Apple event came out, or when they showed the new iPhone specifically, I was getting bombarded in my Instagram feed and even in my phone, just getting text messages from my friends and like, hey, I just saw the event, I saw your reaction to it. What do you think I should get the new iPhone? And I asked them, okay, what are you going to use it for? And I think it was my nephew, his response was kind of the funniest one to me, because he's like, I'm going to go for the Pro Max. And I'm like, why do you need the Pro Max? Because why not? And I'm like, okay, do you need all the cameras? Do you really need that big of a phone? Do you rely on all the features that are being advertised for this phone to do what you want? And he's like, not really. It just looks cool. And I'm like, huh. And I'm just like, I get it. He's 15. I get it. Like, when you're younger, you tend to more, I'd say, impulse buy.
Oh, I wouldn't even throw that on age. I'm not going to do that. Those crazy kids need to get off my lawn. I'm the cranky old guy who's somewhere in between Gen X and millennials. No, the whole the whole point that we're trying to unravel when we're taking a look at very specific and very granular differences in performance, we've got to get around just that knee-jerk emotional response. Apple is a company, Samsung is a company, most mega corporations, they kind of exist in a consumer relationship where they're trying to craft that emotional connection to the brand. And because tech is now a commodity and tech is necessary for your daily lives, it starts to fit into someone's daily life just as much as the kicks that they're wearing or the purse that they're sporting. It's a lifestyle identification. And now you're on a team, your team iPhone or your team Samsung or your team Pixel or your team OnePlus. Right. And that's really one of the hardest things to overcome, is just getting around someone has sort of a lifestyle defining relationship with this glowing rectangle, what lives in their pocket, and handles some of their most intimate communications. I mean, that's the vessel through which they've decided to interact with the world. That doesn't mean that we should just sort of kowtow to their beliefs or their assertions about the marketing claims of performance. We still should be doing a better job of trying to analyze and assess what you're really getting, because I feel a lot of consumers might be placed into vulnerable positions. If you're rocking an iPhone 8, what are you doing on your phone that the iPhone 11 would represent an actual tangible improvement to your lifestyle? That's not good for Apple, because Apple exists. Apple depends on this emotional relationship and this keeping up with the Joneses and this flavor of consumerism that they've crafted. And again, this isn't unique to Apple, but I think Apple has been the most effective at crossing over from a tech brand to a lifestyle brand. But when faced with that rational side of the conversation, it's very difficult to justify any kind of 2 or 3 year upgrade on a modern smartphone. If you bought in on a Galaxy S8, moving to a Galaxy S10 probably won't significantly change your overall experience on a smartphone. And ditto that with an iPhone 7 Plus to an iPhone 11, not the iPhone 11 Pro with its triple cameras, but from an iPhone 7 Plus to an iPhone 11, you're probably still going to be doing the same things in the same ways, and it's going to take the same amount of time. And actually, some people might even be able to make the argument that Apple's radio stack could be better depending on what flavor of the iPhone 7 you have. So your network performance might actually go down depending on how they've crafted this experience. So it's the reason why I still try to pick at some of this, and I use snarky comedy as a defense mechanism, but I try to show all my data. I'm increasingly concerned with the consumer position in how we represent these gadgets, because when there's a consumer fallout, when part of this market tanks, it means I get less cool tech. It means I get fewer companies taking experiments and trying to push the boundaries and trying to do exciting things. You've got a number of manufacturers that can look at, well, Apple can get away with very iterative improvements to the iPhone while continuing to raise prices from the iPhone 8 to the iPhone 11 significantly. I guess we could do the same. And now we're starting to see the evidence of that, where the Galaxy Note 10 is kind of a lesser phone than the Galaxy S10 at the same price. You know, so we're seeing even Samsung is trying to pivot and do business in the way that Apple does business. And that means the rest of the dominoes will probably fall behind them, because it's just too profitable for companies to rely more on their marketing and their media and their messaging than really putting up the kinds of magical improvements that they're claiming.
Yeah, and I want to key in on one of those words you literally said. It was more in the section when you were talking about transitioning from a lifestyle for a tech brand to a lifestyle, that you said Apple was effective. And to me, that was rattling in my brain, because I'm like, wait, he's actually onto something about that one, because if we look at most tech companies, they all have tried to do this. They're all trying to make this transition from a tech brand to a lifestyle. Obviously, Samsung and Google are probably the two main ones, even though some people say, well, Google, maybe, but Samsung, you can tell that they definitely are trying, but it's not sticking the way it should. And to me, that idea of effective is kind of the key word here. Is like, Apple is very effective at many things. And I made many comments during the event too, where I was like, I also agree with some comments how, even though, yes, some of the Apple products were kind of disappointing when they showed them off, it's the videos behind them is what they can sell you on. And I think this is very important when we have to think about it in terms of Apple. And we're not, like we mentioned, we're not trying to specifically focus on Apple, but this whole idea that they're very
I mean, I think it's fair to focus on Apple, so long as we're acknowledging that this is a sort of a generalized, a lot of the points we're going to make about Apple will completely apply to a number of other competitors in the space too.
For sure. And during the event, it was just in my mind, I was just like, they found, like, they really have this metric or this method of getting you emotionally attached to these items, like the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch was clearly the clearest sign to me that they are trying to build an emotional connection. That they're really, if I really want to use English terms like ethos, if we really want to go with that, or, well, yeah, we really...
No, that's completely appropriate. Again, I mean, it's about an emotional journey and an emotional connection to something you're going to interact with. And if you can get someone to personalize that experience, they're going to relate to it more than someone, yelling specs and numbers and benchmarks and pricing information at you. And again, it's also why Samsung has been so effective at mocking Apple. They've created a user base and a fan base that it's very aggressive, and it appeals significantly to that kid in the back of the class making fun of the teacher's pet. That's coming from the top down. So when I have this same conversation, to me, I think it becomes in part a topic about media literacy. Understanding what these corporations are trying to accomplish changes your perspective on these feel good or feel fun, feel cool messages that are being pounded into our skull. I mean, it's no coincidence that Apple and Samsung are the top two, represent something like 70% of the market in the United States. And both of those companies operate on advertising budgets which dwarf their whole competitors' full manufacturing budget. But we should also then, when I have this conversation about Samsung, it's usually not, oh, well, they're trying to make you feel good about this product. It's to say, listen, they were making fun of Apple, and then they went and did the exact same thing as Apple, and then they pulled all of the videos where they were making fun of Apple. So, yeah, Samsung used to make crazy fun of Apple for not having a removable battery. And then when the Galaxy S6 came out, they suddenly, all of those videos on YouTube disappeared. Samsung used to make a ton of fun at Apple's expense about getting rid of the headphone jack. And then the Note 10 came out, and all of those videos disappeared. So we can't sit here and let Samsung win with this kind of conversation either. They're not better, and in many ways, that's even more frustrating because they're crafting this disruptor kind of image, this counterculture. The iPhone is for stodgy people that, don't want to be on the bleeding edge of tech. And then they're basically going about trying to replicate the exact same business model as Apple and trying to not only get you to buy a $1,000 phone, but then also get you locked into a Samsung ecosystem of accessories and get you those additional add-on purchases. And, well, we just bought AKG, just like Apple bought Beats, and now we've got to slap that AKG label on some products that you'll need to rebuy because you can't use your old headphones with this new Galaxy Note. I mean, that's the same blueprint. I mean, they're not even being original in this while they're crafting these ads to try and mock, iPhone sheep, and I feel that's just as disingenuous as Apple trying to claim that you can make a professional movie on your iPhone And they showed these amazing video clips that were all produced on a multi-million-dollar soundstage with a full production crew and gimbals and dollies and tracks and lighting. And yeah, you too can make a movie on your iPhone so long as you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in making a movie. That again, I think it sets up an unrealistic expectation for what the consumer is really going to experience when they fire up that product. And their iPhone videos on the iPhone 11 are just the same as their iPhone videos were on their iPhone 8.
Yeah. And I do want to touch a little bit on, well, like we are going to talk about the 11 Pro. We did want to talk about that, but I do want to touch a little bit on the Note 10 because I did talk about that when they revealed it. To me, watching that event, I felt very, I wouldn't say disappointed, but I felt like I didn't really feel anything when watching it. And especially mainly because when I thought of the Note 10 and Note 10 Plus, first I was like, okay, obviously they're trying to get you to buy the Note 10 Plus. The Note 10 is, I get it, for some people, they're like, we wanted a smaller Note. But let's be real here. They didn't make it because of that. They made it because they want to give you a reason to push you to the Plus and spend the more money. And when I look at the Note 10 Plus, I'm like, Samsung made a better phone, or a more complete phone, really, in the S10 Plus. And that came out early in the year. And it has everything that, quote unquote, is what a professional wants. You got a headphone jack, although it isn't a good headphone jack.
It's a good headphone jack. It's just not a premium audiophile headphone jack, which would match that premium price tag.
And obviously, I told a lot of people when I did a video comparing the Note 10 Plus and the OnePlus 7 Pro that this really isn't a comparison over specs. This isn't. But these two phones seem to be the ones that everybody seems to be comparing in the Android space because they're considered the powerhouses. But it's two different use cases, clearly. Like, obviously, yes, I will admit, depending on how you use the camera and everything, because if you like going through the manual settings and everything, then yeah, that becomes more of a subjective thing. Performance, same thing. Even though, yes, I do believe Oxygen OS is much cleaner than One UI. I do applaud Samsung for the improvements in One UI. I do believe it definitely helped. It made Samsung phones more enjoyable in terms of software. But Oxygen OS is still more cleaner, and then there's still some features that are missing from the Note 10 that don't really categorize it as a pro feature. Like the pro video editing software isn't a pro video editing software. It's very basic. I almost consider it almost like iMovie. It's just very basic. It's not something to go write home about. And obviously, but they do have Adobe Rush CC, so that kind of annoys me because a lot of powerful Android phones, to be honest, like I'm kind of mad that the OnePlus 7 Pro doesn't have Rush CC available. And I'm like, this phone would benefit so much by having it. Because
it's you're talking about momentum. If you're on Android, you can check out KineMaster or Power Director, and both of those apps are better video editing platforms than Adobe Rush. But I think we're all pretty confident Adobe will eventually win because they're going to leverage their entire catalog of cloud services, where a Power Director from Cyberlink, not a lot of people are editing on Power Director for their PC, which is a shame. The mobile app right now is head and shoulders better than Adobe Rush. But again, it's marketing and it's user base and it's momentum. And we can be pretty confident that just like beta versus VHS, that Power Director will probably not win. Though you're still going to find a whole series of holdouts, cranky people like me that'll probably stick with it until Rush absolutely surpasses what I can do in Power Director.
And then obviously, in iOS, even though iOS does have Rush as well, they have competition for LumaFusion. And LumaFusion right now is obviously being promoted very heavily, especially when you have people like Henny the Business promoting it. And it is a very capable software, very capable. And that's why I tell people a lot of the time, to me, if you really want to do video editing, when you have the option of a MacBook Pro and an iPad Pro, the iPad Pro is now going to be a more viable option due to iPad OS coming out, and it will entice people. And I even tell college students the same thing, because obviously I'm in college, because I've already talked about it multiple times. But when I look in the classroom, and I usually see this combination of things, and I know this kind of is going off topic a little bit, but I'm going to find a way to loop this all around. But
I believe in you. I trust you.
so when we look in the classroom, there's three things you're going to see. You're either going to see a gaming laptop, you're either going to see a MacBook, or you're going to see an iPad. You are guaranteed to see three of these things. And when I think about it, I'm like, okay, the gaming laptop makes sense because it's mostly in engineering classes and they want these absurd specs for a laptop. And I'm like, okay, first off, just make a desktop, get a Chromebook. That's all you need. I will say that is head and shoulders has been proven true every single class I've been in. And a lot of the senior engineering classes have agreed with me with that. So the MacBook, I will say, I get why the engineering college doesn't really want students to go with the MacBook because there are some limitations in terms of the software we use that don't really run that well on Mac OS specifically. And then the iPad seems to be the weird stepchild in the middle because it's like most people that I talk to that have an iPad as well, they mainly tell me, oh, it's because we have a desktop in our room and it's a Windows desktop and we're able to, a lot of the apps we use are cloud services, or really they don't even need an app. It's just a website that we go to. And I'm like, okay, so how does this work when we start talking about video editing and video rendering? When I look at it, I see a lot of people hype up the iPad Pro now because obviously, yes, iPad OS, the USB-C port on the iPad Pro will now work the way it's supposed to work, or really how it's always supposed to work, period. But it's now going to function in the way that now it kind of brings up the option, do we really need more internal storage in the iPad? Can we get away with the base models now? And I will say this, in terms of the iPad Pro, that is a little bit of I'd say really more of a tricky line to talk about, because when you talk about the 12.9 specifically, the main benefit with the terabyte of storage is you get the 6 gigabytes of RAM instead of traditionally 4. So there is that. Yeah. So, but in terms of talking about,
again, I mean, if we're saying professional machines, a pro machine, a pro version of the iPad, I would appreciate having those specs separated from each other, where I would be able to buy a base model storage, but a higher RAM version of an iPad, because that's the kind of flexibility pros would appreciate. This is the frustrating thing about talking about iPhones, is a lot of my issues with iOS as a platform would be solved if they would stop pretending that phones and tablets are different. There's nothing about iPad OS that someone on an iPhone wouldn't appreciate. The better file management and the ability to multitask with split screen apps. I mean, as soon as you give that to an iPhone Max user, you'd see people go, well, of course, now, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Apple did the right thing. I love it. It's awesome. But right now, we seem to think we're pretending that it's better to have a different operating system with more features and support on a tablet than we do on an iPhone. If I had an iPad Pro, I would want to be able to buy the base model storage and buy the highest amount of RAM and then plug in an external solid state drive, so I could work directly off of like one of those crazy terabyte Samsung drives. And that would be a better work platform for me than just spending a ton more to put all of that storage inside the iPad. And it's also more flexible because you can move that storage around. I can't move that storage around as easily when it's cooked, when it's baked into a tablet. So I mean, when we get into some of those other conversations, like, especially what you're seeing in the collegiate space, people who are increasingly leaning on web services, and a tablet makes a lot of sense. This is another aspect of why I've been so frustrated with the phone benchmarking conversation. There are so many real world situations where my phone can significantly outperform a good mid-ranger consumer laptop, somewhere in that $1,500 territory. Yeah. I focus a lot on content creation. I'm obviously editing and rendering a lot of videos. But if I were able to dock my phone into a laptop shell, it would be a better mobile platform than my $1,300 MateBook. Yeah. It's that much faster now. And when we're talking about 4K video, trying to get that uploaded to YouTube, I don't have to tether because the phone is still an LTE connected device. I don't have to add another device to my LTE plan because it would just be working directly off of the phone and outputting to the same quality. Now mobile software is able to better leverage mobile hardware than general x86 desktop and laptop software can do the same. Yeah. So even though we know the processor in my MateBook is probably a more powerful overall general purpose computing platform, it's not as well optimized. And that optimization matters where I push render on 4K video at similar qualities in a mobile app versus my desktop app, and my render speeds can be 4-to-1 or 6-to-1 faster on my phone. So I want you to go to a content creator and say, hey, what would you give to render video 4 times faster than your current solution? And you get a lot of probably indecent proposals on what they would be willing to give to improve their render times that much.
Yeah, I kind of have some examples of that of my own too, because it's kind of the same debate I had when I was thinking about selling my laptop that I bought, my HP M15, and built my own computer, and then bought an iPad Pro off my friend Rodrigo. Yeah, I'm going to shout you out again, Rodrigo. I know you're going to keep making jokes about suing me. Have fun with that, bud. But I thought about the same thing in my head, because at that time I was using Audacity, and I still do because I'm still a little bit scared to try Audition a little bit, but it's more of when I look at the render times, I'm like, well, I spent a lot of money. I spent about because the Omen was on sale for like $1,000, and I bought the warranties and, antivirus and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and I'm like, it's getting really high. This is getting on my nerves. And I spent a lot of money for this quote unquote premium laptop experience for a gaming laptop. And then I look at my computer that I have now, and I'm like, I spent $900 and I got a way better machine. And I'm like, and this is able to do all my editing much cleaner, even though, yes, it doesn't have, it's still a 6-core CPU like my laptop, even because the only difference is instead of Intel, I'm using Ryzen in my main machine. But when I look at it, it's overall managing my workflow much better, and I spent less money. I sold my laptop for $900 and bought my computer for built my computer for $900, and mainly because Micro Center's discount sales. That's great. But in my mind, when we think about the whole, and I know you talk about this a lot, and we've talked about it, especially, the main thing you always bring up is the OnePlus 7 Pro, which we are about to go into. Is the OnePlus 7 Pro, yes, as a computing device, is very, very capable. It is a very capable phone because of what they've done with the UFS 3.0, obviously the optimization with the chip and everything, that it's able to do this. Yes, I do agree that in terms of camera quality, yes, the camera is still the most lacking point, but it's not because of hardware. It's mostly software improvements that are needed.
Yeah, and actually the camera hardware offers up some pretty significant advantages over a Galaxy S10 or an LG or even an iPhone. It's just OnePlus's camera software doesn't seem to be capable of leveraging that hardware advantage.
And it's kind of just a little bit side note too, because really, as we really go about how you talk about a little bit with the OnePlus 7 Pro comparison that you did, because they asked you to do the same thing with a OnePlus 7 Pro, rendering the video comparison to the iPhone. Let's ask this question really, is how do you feel like this whole issue overall affects the new iPhones? Where do you see that this affects it the most?
Well, very minimally. I put out these tests, and I have to make it exceedingly clear. This is a very specific performance comparison. I believe it is my assertion. I believe that consumers should be getting more out of their mobile devices. Yeah. And a major talking point, a major topic on my channel these are the other things you could be doing with your phone to help displace other purchases like tablets or potentially laptops. Right. And as an ecosystem, Apple is not as flexible in that regard. So your iPhone can do a lot. It's got the screaming fast A-series processor, but a lot of the Apple ecosystem that you rely on to make some things easier gets in your way, and it makes file management a bit more difficult. It makes project, especially if you have to collaborate, project collaboration can be a little bit more difficult. If you have any kind of a mixed computing environment, you sacrifice a lot of time, and it's still a device that can't quite completely live on its own without another computer. Like, just to get media on an iPhone, you can mess around with very expensive dongles or then try and sync through something like iTunes. It can't quite exist as its own self-contained unit.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, because the only thing I was going to say really is this is the same thing that happened with the iPad Pro before iPad OS was even announced and everybody went mental about it. Is really the only effective way to use the iPad to its, I'd say, fullest in terms of video editing was you have to either buy a wireless hard drive. You have to either buy that or you buy something like the RAV Power File Hub, which I have one because I have the newer one that they came out with before they replaced the smaller version.
That's actually a stinking great accessory in general,
it works,
but it becomes almost mission critical if you're using a lot of iOS stuff.
I tell people a lot of time. That's why, like, I asked my friend, "Hey, does he want my old one?" And they're like, "What does it do?" And I'm like, do you want to actually expand your storage and actually move files around on your phone? He's like, yeah. Then here. And he's like, dude, this is amazing. And I'm like, why have I never heard of this? And I'm like, it's weird too.
Where in Android land,
we just do it naturally.
You plug the hard drive directly into the phone. You plug the flash drive directly into the phone. You pull the card out of your camera, and you get any cheap USB 3 card reader, and you plug it directly into your phone. I mean, there's no importing. There's no what file compatibility. So, I mean, to get into some of the specific tests real quick to break this down, in my snarky tweet, I mentioned I was really trying to focus on iPhone to iPhone, that video rendering hasn't improved since the iPhone 6S. And so I have an iPhone SE. It's the same generation, same chipset, and it can outperform my iPhone XS in this one specific performance leg race between two phones.
Yeah.
But also in that tweet, I made the same, like for Apple to sit here and give us a bar graph where they show how much more powerful the A13 is than the A12 and how the A12 is still more powerful than the newest Snapdragon 855. Well, we can test that claim against their claims of content creation. And again, like I said before, ask your content creator friends, what would you give for a 20 to 50% increase in project rendering times? People spend a lot of money on graphics cards and new desktops and workstations to get smaller improvements than that. Right. So, I've got the numbers sort of in my spreadsheet up here because I've been tracking this stuff for the last 4 years, where an iPhone XS is almost at around a minute 15 for re-rendering this 1 minute of UHD video. The iPhone, the OnePlus 7 Pro can do the same test in about 48 seconds.
Wow.
So it's not just, I saved a couple seconds. It's
big difference.
No, this is a substantial difference when we're talking about this one test. That performance actually increases the longer the project goes because iPhones don't have very good thermal management hardware. The OnePlus 7 Pro is actually notable for including, I don't know if it's a heat pipe or a vapor chamber, but the back of the phone gets really hot, but it gets really hot because it's trying to get as much heat out of the battery and out of the chipset as it can. It was one of the reasons why the price of the OnePlus went up. I mean, a lot of people focus on screens and the pop-up selfie camera and all that fun stuff. But there are some under the hood benefits that don't always go as mentioned. So the longer your project goes, the better able the OnePlus is at managing its thermals, because these are all passively cooled computing platforms. And so that spurred on probably 50 hours of debate between various people online, because I put it up in a tweet. It wasn't like I listed my years of methodology and testing in 240 characters. But essentially what I do is I use the exact same video file, and then I tried to match quality of output. But I was running this test initially in iMovie because I wanted to show Apple hardware on the same generation of Apple operating system with Apple software. Right. This is all the ecosystem argument. Apple makes this argument. You do better on iOS because we have control over our ecosystem. And so that's what I was trying to focus on. Adding the OnePlus 7 was kind of the snarky little dig at their bar graphs during the keynote. But, you instantly run into all the people that weren't really reading. Reading comprehension with fanboys is very, very low. So a lot of them missed that I use the same video file for all of the phones. And it's not from another phone, it's from a mirrorless camera so that I can make sure there's no advantage. Right. It's not iPhone video rendering on an iPhone and OnePlus video rendering on a OnePlus. This is removing that discrepancy. Right. And then when other people are, well, the iPhone renders to H.265. And you're like, nope, the iPhone renders to H.264, just like the OnePlus, just like the iPhone SE. The XS isn't doing anything with HEVC. Well, it's because the iPhone is rendering higher quality. And you're like, nope, the OnePlus is producing video at twice the data rate, and it's visibly less compressed video than what the iPhone is producing in significantly faster. So I mean, we're talking like a 30% improvement to your rendering times and twice the data rate of twice the quality of that video with similar video compression. It's similar H.264 compression. Well, then the problem was, well, I should use the best app on iOS and the best app on Android. That's the problem, is I wasn't being fair to the iPhone using first-party iPhone software. And so then rerunning that test again using Luma, I was getting a little frustrated with the quality of the debate. So I ran Luma Fusion Touch on the iPhone XS, and I matched Luma's output, because Luma can output a higher quality video than Power Director can on Android. So I had to do the standard video rendering on Luma against the high quality video rendering on Power Director. And basically those are just labels to say they're both around 50 megabit per second. So I'm taking a 100 megabit per second source file and I'm squishing that data rate in half. That's really what this test is, just compressing that down to half the data rate. Right. And we're arriving at very, very similar quality now between Luma Touch and Power Director. And the iPhone XS still loses that race to an LG V30 from 2017. So it's not the Snapdragon 855. It's not the Snapdragon 845. It's the Snapdragon 835. And Apple can't beat a 2-year-old LG in something that they are claiming is a benefit of buying an expensive, premium, super powerful A12 chipset, perfect for those content creators. It's not even close. I mean, it's not as wide a disparity as a OnePlus 7 Pro, but the V30 is still noticeably faster than what you can achieve on last year's premium top-of-the-line iPhone.
And I think this pretty much will be an easy way so we can really lead into the last thing before we have to go. This really, I think, like what you mentioned, is when you mentioned LG. And then I want to touch a little bit, I think really the best place to probably finish is touching on the 11 Pro in terms of video editing and video rendering and things like that, because they talk about the claims of this being content creators' best friend, that this is professional video. And I'm like, well, not exactly. Because when you talk about pro video, that means the pro settings on the camera needs to be adequate, and the same thing has to go for video as well, that you need pro settings for video. Can you control the audio? Can you control the gain? Can you put a filter? And obviously, like you've already shown videos when you did the comparisons with the Sony Xperia and then the LG V50, when you did the comparison, that they're obviously, that to me is that's what I define as actual pro video. Like, and do you just want to give your thoughts in terms of in terms of video regarding the 11 Pro?
Yeah. So when it comes to the iPhone 11 Pro, again, I fear a lot of this is caught up in that feel-good marketing messaging, and Apple is able to conflate performance and sort of the feel-good marketing messages. I think I lost Josh there. Let's see if he dials back in. You still recording? Yeah, I heard the question. I'm still recording. So let me just get back into answering that. You should be able to cut pretty easily. So when it comes to the iPhone 11 Pro, and especially this keynote, the thing that I worry about is conflating what the phone will probably do well against footage that was captured in very controlled environments with a very expensive team of video production professionals. In fact, if you go back to that Apple keynote, after they're done spending a significant amount of time talking about Filmic Pro, which is a third-party app for the iPhone, it is not the actual iPhone camera, you'll notice that they start showing off footage of this iPhone 11 on a set with a rain machine and a wind machine and a guy stomping through puddles and tracking. Look how amazingly smooth this shot is. Yeah. There's one clip of that video where an iPhone is being used in a handheld gimbal, where it's in this like little sort of stabilizer rig. They cut away from that. It's very short. It's maybe a second and a half cut. And then they cut away from that, and they show you the amazing footage. It's being captured, big air quotes, captured from the iPhone. And then when they cut back to the iPhone, it's a dude in a poncho hand-holding the iPhone 11 in the rain without a case with like 2 fingers. Like I'm just totally organically hand-holding my iPhone, the slippery iPhone in the rain. And again, that's a marketing trick. That's film 101. If I do a close-up on your eyes and the eyes look to the left and then I cut to a scene of a puppy, you are going to link those ideas in your brain that person looked to the left and is now looking at a puppy. Apple is doing the same thing in this advertisement, in this keynote video, showing you this incredible footage and then showing you these close-ups of the iPhone, even though that's not really how this product was used to capture that footage. And I find that to be borderline misrepresenting what you can really do, the amazing things you can really do with mobile hardware. I mean, I've been producing videos entirely out of the cameras and the software on my phone, but I'm very careful to say like, hey man, I did this walk and talk vlog and I'm down here in Santa Monica, but I want you to see that I'm using a wireless lav, so that's why my audio is so good. It's not coming from the phone. The phone microphones would be dead in all of this wind down by the ocean. But, you know, here's this little, this little mini dead cat on a wireless lav, this little fluff ball in the middle of my chest. I need you to see this is how I'm really getting this stuff done. So that to me becomes one of the larger conversations here. When you talk about benchmarking, you can always cherry pick individual tests and then show off winners and losers on these overly simplistic bar graphs. Getting into the actual nuts and bolts of what makes a purchase better for you is significantly more difficult, is significantly more time consuming. And we can't just continue letting the marketing speak for itself. These are very bold claims that need to be assessed, that need to be analyzed, that there should be some market correction for folks out there who I think are rightfully frustrated when their new purchase doesn't seem to be that much better or significantly different in their use over the purchase that they made 2 years ago. And they might have missed an opportunity to use something which would have been a better fit for their actual lifestyle. I mean, again, like think of all the different phones that we've brought up in this conversation. Sony Xperias with UHD displays. You can get a 4K screen on a phone if you go with a Sony. LG series phones with phenomenal audiophile grade processing. I'm using, super high resistance Beyerdynamic professional cans on my LG phones, and they sound phenomenal. They'll sound like garbage on a Samsung. Pro manual features and controls. Asus with a $500 phone and a flip-out selfie camera that would maybe be a better fit for a lot of content creators using the nicer cameras on their phone and still being able to compose a vlog talking directly to that camera. So we miss out on all these opportunities to say, like, what is it that you really do? And that's not a gotcha question. I'm not like, hey, what are you doing with your phone? I'm actually trying to get you to think about what you could possibly disrupt. The number of people in your classes who are leveraging tablets. Well, maybe if Samsung put out like a $300 laptop dock, you wouldn't even need to buy a tablet. Why buy a $600 tablet, which doesn't perform as well as your phone, when you could just plug your phone into a big battery with a screen and a keyboard built in? Right. You know, why buy your $1,000 school laptop when a lot of those web services and a lot of those programs and a lot of that content can be easily accessed on web services, and your phone will drive that just as well or maybe even better than a purpose-built $1,000 portable computer might be able to do. And we're not going to get there if we let Samsung and Apple dictate where the market goes. We actually need disruptors in this space that can achieve or end run around the current model of Apple wants you to have an iPhone and an iPad and a MacBook when you might only have really needed your phone. You know, like for your use, you might only need the horsepower of a smartphone these days.
And I think that's overall the best place to really end the conversation, because there's nothing really I can say that you literally haven't just said, that you just perfectly recapped the entire conversation. Just I can't say anything. Like, that perfectly just sums up everything.
Oh, you can always say something. I'm not perfect. The last thing I would want to put out there, and this is my sort of standard call to arms. Video rendering matters to me because I make a lot of videos. So when I'm ranking this performance and I can show improvements on one platform and I can show that Apple has been fairly stagnant on its platform, the other thing that I want to express is what other real world conditions can we drive these phones through? And I'm asking in earnest. I would very much be curious to see what other types of computing stressful tests people could arrive at to try and grade this as real world performance. I think synthetic benchmarks are too easy
to manipulate.
I mean, not to manipulate. I mean, it sounds like a devious phrase. I'm not trying to make this, evil. When I say
misrepresenting is probably the better term.
But then also not properly communicating. I think that's really my biggest problem. Like I said before, is if you fire up Geekbench, don't just stop at the final number score. Go through all of the little granular tests and see, like, did your phone perform better than another phone in the tests that matter to you? But that takes that time and effort, and it's not as fun to visualize. Like, oh, I can see SQL performance has a slightly higher number than SQL performance on another phone, but what does that mean if I really have to access a database? Like, did I save, a millisecond, or did I save a half a second in accessing this piece of information? And that's why I look at, I can put two phones up, put a camera on two phones, and push render, and I can show you very clearly, what the performance differences and discrepancies, because it's not a second, it's not a half a second. We're talking, 30 to 40% in a lot of these comparative performance races, especially when you normalize for the app. If you have the same app on iOS and the same app on Android, we're seeing very clear and consistent advantages for Android in this type of heavy lifting video rendering horsepower race. But that I want that to extend beyond what is just a personal experience for me. So if anyone has suggestions beyond gaming too, because I think gaming has kind of gotten to a wash where it looks smoother. It might be more a component of what type of display they used than the actual performance of the device. I mean, gaming looks way better on my OnePlus 7 Pro, but that's because they're using a high refresh rate display, not necessarily because it really is driving more graphics processing, So I feel like gaming has kind of gotten has been devalued as the heavy lifting benchmark of choice.
Right. But yeah, I obviously couldn't really say it any better myself. Like, obviously, I thank you guys so much for sitting through this conversation with me and Juan. Obviously, yes, it is shorter than our last conversation. Yeah, obviously, a lot of people gave me feedback on the like, please don't do another 2-hour episode because, God, this is going to hurt. No.
Or do more 2-hour episodes.
Yeah, that is true.
That's the other thing, too, is, If it's you got that conversation, maybe do more of them, and then you'll get all the podcast junkies who want those longer episodes.
True. But thank you, Juan.
I'm totally being facetious. Yeah, oh yeah, of course, definitely. I was happy to join you again.
But
definitely, I'm always happy to dig into this stuff, and then also it's just I think a lot of people out there, especially the more consumer focused and maybe the less tech enthusiast focused, but there's a lot of stuff that I think we'll have to sort out with our feelers on where all this stuff goes next. And I think making sure that we're keeping this stuff fair and that we're properly disclosing how all this stuff works is really the only way we're going to get to the next phase of cool technology.
Yeah, good. I can't say it any better, but thank you guys so much for your time. I love you guys to death. Have yourselves a wonderful week. Obviously, there is no Friday episode, so you guys don't have to worry about it. But thank you guys so much. I love you guys to death. Bye, guys. Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.